Class 12. Now, we're going through the principles of reason because philosophy is, the definition, certain knowledge of all things through their ultimate causes in the light of the principles of reason. We said before, one of the differences between the empirical sciences that are all done by observation is you can do an experiment in a lab, it'll cause an explosion. The example that I always give is glycerol and potassium permanganate. And you can come to the conclusion that if you mix these two things, it will combust, and it will combust in this way. And if you have the measuring devices, it can tell you it can tell you what's the status of the heat, how many temperatures is it hotter than fire, all these type of things. So the natural sciences can give you all that information. We benefit from all that information, but the natural science don't tell you precisely what is change and how is change possible. That's the type of thing that's answered by philosophy. True philosophy, because we know there's only two types of philosophy: Thomism and Bulldinkyism, as Dr. Waters would say. And the more I study, the more he is so right. He's so right. So, so in the previous class, we were going through the principles of reason because Dr. Waters actually lists about 41 or 42 of them, and there is at least one or two, I think, that were he alive, and I would point this out to him, he would say, "Oh yes, we will." Like, for example, a principle that he doesn't have, which I would believe is a principle of reason, a fundamental principle. I think I said this last class, is a small error in the beginning. A small error in principle is a great error in conclusion. And if you have your rocket ship pointed towards the moon to launch to the moon, and if you are off 1 degree, that as you get farther, you're off 10 degrees, 100 degrees, 1,000 degrees, and you are way off your target, and you go shooting out into outer space and never hit the moon. Why anybody would want to go to the moon is, anyway, but, yes, so a small error, so he doesn't have that as part of his principles of reason, but it is very much so, I would say. So, the last two things we talked about was three things: efficient causality. Every contingent being, if it has an efficient cause. Do you know what the word contingent being means?
No.
Contingent means it doesn't exist of itself. It is necessary. It necessarily relies on something else. It necessarily relies on something else. It's contingent. And really, all being except God is contingent being. So,
being that is not of itself?
Yeah. It is the distinction that we'll see made elsewhere is the distinction between a contingent being and necessary being. There's only one necessary being who must exist, who does exist, who is existence, and that's God. But we'll get to that when we get into natural theology. And again, the natural theology that we're going to be talking about are those things that can come by the use of reason. Discoveries we can make through the use of reason. One of the problem today is that young people and even people in college are not really taught to think logically. And so they look at these principles of reason and they say they don't see the value in them because they don't think, they haven't been taught to think logically for over a long period of time. And especially now,
they're taught not to think logically.
Well, especially now when so much is based on feelings and emotion, and how do you feel about that? And actually, Amber and the other girl I was talking to at Fishermore College, they got a kick out of this because I said that the young people in school are really taught to say one thing: I find that offensive.
Yeah.
I find that offensive. They have no idea what they're talking about. I find that offensive. So and this is not a new problem because Father David Greenstock, when he was going after the new theology, which was a new theology in which the purveyors did not want to use Thomism anymore, but they wanted to adapt new philosophical systems. The more modern, idealistic, existentialist philosophical systems in order to speak to modern man in a language that he understands. Now, people like Garrigou-Lagrange and Father Anthony Lee, not so much. I mean, he was more of a chronicler, but Garrigou-Lagrange, Father David Greenstock, they were screaming bloody murder over this, saying you can't do away with the principles, the philosophy of realism, and expect to have a real theology as a result. You're going to end up in a pig's breakfast. You're going to end up in process theology. It's something that I mentioned in the first class, this idea that theology is always moving and changing with the times.
It's in a state of flux.
In a state of flux, yes. And so, but David Greenstock said something very interesting in 1950. He said the average man who is living through this age of feelings, because you remember by now we had Hollywood, we had movies, we had radio, we had lots of entertainment. He said the average man is almost incapable of logical thought. And I'm talking about the real hard rock reality that traces things back to their ultimate causes. Now, even when I published that in Catholic Family News, I got somebody writing me, and you know what they said?
I find that offensive.
I find that offensive. Yeah. What do you mean? But it is true. So even when you present the existence of God to people, what do they say? Everything has to go back to a cause. So what to them do they say?
Well, who makes that?
Well, who made God? We'll talk about that later on.
Good.
We'll talk about that later on, because there's actually two answers to that. That are actually we'll do it now. We'll do it now.
But we're doing the principles of reason.
We're doing the
have
principles of
25
reason,
minutes.
but it's out of order. But anyway, I want to find exactly the principle on this sheet here. Oh, here we are. Okay, so we'll talk about this. This is probably the only thing we do today.
Okay.
Principle of limited regress. Have you ever heard that term before? Okay, principle of limited regress, which means in a series of causes, actually and essentially subordinated, you cannot regress to infinity. Actually, it's well worth. Now, this is actually principle number 10 on his sheet. We're leaping ahead.
Okay, would you repeat this again?
In a series of causes, actually and essentially subordinated. Well, first of all, the principle of limited regress, colon. In a series of causes.
In a series. I'm sorry, I'm a slow writer.
That's okay.
In a series of causes.
Actually and essentially subordinated.
Actually. And.
Essentially subordinated.
Substantially subordinated?
Essentially. ESSENTIALLLY.
Okay, and
Essentially subordinated.
Essentially subordinated.
You cannot regress
You
infinitely.
cannot regress
Okay, in a series of causes, actually and essentially subordinated, you cannot regress infinitely. Now, who made me? My father made me. Who made my father? My father, his father made him. Who made his father? His father made him. Who's made his father? Now, in a certain sense, we're going back in time here, and we'll use that for the proofs of the existence of God with motion. We actually don't go back in time. But, well, for the sake of an easy argument, we'll go back in time. Okay, so who made me, my daddy? Who made his? He made him, his daddy and mommy. Who made him? 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 His daddy and mommy. Okay, you cannot go back infinitely without having a first cause. And that's what's called the principle of limited regress. You cannot have infinite regress. You can't have this long-term effect or any sort of effect without an actual cause that is not a cause of itself, that is not being of itself. Okay. A couple of ways we can look at that is, imagine if you saw a chain just hanging from the sky, and you looked at the last link on that chain, and you said to somebody, you pointed to it and you said, "What's holding this up?" And they thought you were talking about the last link on the chain, and they would say, "Well, the link above it." "Oh, well, what's holding that up?" "Well, the link above that." "Well, what's holding that up?" "Well, the link above that." Okay? No one thinking clearly would ever believe that that thing just holds itself up to infinity with no hand holding it. Okay? With no hand holding it. There has to be one stable hand holding the whole thing up. If you try to tell science that I saw a chain hanging from the sky, the links went back infinitely with nobody holding it up, they would laugh you out of the classroom. Because in science we know it doesn't work like that. There has to be a first cause. There has to be a first cause. If you have the example of, imagine, well, we live not too far from the railroad tracks here, and we see these freight trains going. Now imagine if you were sitting, you happen to be sitting in the park, and you could see, well, where I grew up in Tacony, you could see the trains. It was right across the way there. And you would see these freight cars just going and going and going and going and going and going and going. And even if you sat there all day long, and there was one freight car, one freight train rather, that it seemed endless. One freight car after the next, one pulling the next. Subordinated causes, okay? One thing pulling the next. Again, the natural metaphysics of human intelligence, you would never come to the conclusion that that whole big line of things is moving itself. Whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. That's another principle of reason. And so this is what's called logical thinking. It's according to, I love that line from Dr. Bennett. I actually think he got it from somewhere else, but it doesn't matter. The natural metaphysics of human intelligence. Okay, this is just how we think. We never come to the conclusion that that freight car doesn't either have something pulling it or sometimes you see the engine in the back. It's pushing it. But there is, as it were, in this limited sense, an ultimate cause of all those freight trains moving, linked one to another. Okay, it's subordinated causes. What that means is, that link, we'll go back to our chain, that link, what's holding up the one link? The last link, the second to the last link. Is that a complete answer?
No.
It's not a complete answer, because here's the key. It explains part of it, of the placement of the final chain. It explains part of it, but it doesn't explain all of it. It's getting the linking is happening. The next to the last chain is holding up the last one, but that second one is not holding itself up. That is linked to the one above it, which is linked to one above it, which is linked to the one above it, which is linked to the one above it. Okay, this is just how we think. And so there has to be an unmoved mover. It has to be some final cause that's causing it all. Now, when you take that back to God, so there has to be a God, and what do people say?
Oh, who made God?
The who made God. Yeah. Oh gosh, God, boy, you really stumped me. Boy, I wish I hadn't brought it up. I'm so embarrassed. How am I going to answer this? Oh, who made God? I never thought of that. Woo! Gosh, I'm in trouble. Super God. Super God. Okay. All right. Well then, who made Super God? I got you now. Oh, here you go. Okay. Super Duper God. Oh yeah. Well, who made Super Duper God? I got you now. Oh wow. Super Duper Duper God. All right. What do we see happening here?
That they're getting more and more.
You still have infinite regress. They can a lot of times, and that's why modern man is not trained to think logically. It always goes back in the abstract to infinite regress, something that he would never accept in the natural order. He would never accept that freight train that's just moving itself without anything moving it. He would never accept that chain holding itself up without somebody holding it. But they will keep going back to infinite regress regarding God, super duper God, super duper God, super duper God to the 10th power. You're still doing infinite regress, and you still have to come to one being that is the cause of it all without being caused by anyone else. The second answer to that, and we're going to close here because we're out of time already, because we had to do a fast class today. Okay? We haven't covered this yet, but we will in the future. We covered it quickly, the fact that in God, he is pure act with no potency. He is pure act with no potency. He is the source of everything that is. In a certain sense, we can't use the word possess, but it's the only way we can understand it. He possesses everything that there is. There is nothing that is not somehow in him. And all contingent being get their being from him. Okay? And he is all act and no potency. So, if you went to, as our friends at college level say, now when St. Thomas answered this question, he was answering it for 12-year-olds. All right, but people at college level still haven't worked this out. Again, because most of the modern schools, they don't really teach the liberal arts. They don't teach people how to think critically, I should say critically, logically. Okay?
No, well,
And the ability to do logic and math is not the same as doing logic and philosophy, although it can be very good training if you have the right teachers pointing you the right way. But anyway, so here you have God, right? And you have this infinite regress going back to God. Now, the person says, okay, well then who made God? Okay, well, so we'll just put G here for God in this circle and SJ for super God here. Okay? If you have God on the left side here, and you have this hypothetical super God on the right side here, what do you notice about them?
They're not equal.
Right. They have to be different in some way. If they were exactly the same, they would be the same exact being. So, if they're not equal, and if they're not exactly the same, what does that mean?
It means that there are two of them.
Yeah, but to break it down a little more, that means one has something
That the
other does not. That means that either one or the other, there is a potency that is not actualized. Okay? And if there is a God, so-called, that has a potency that is not actualized, that there is some potency in him, that there is something that he is lacking, guess what? He's not God. The very definition of God, because that's a problem too. People don't know what God is. They think he's a big white fluffy man in a cloud. Okay? With a big beard.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they have no idea who God is. They don't know that God is pure act with no potency. And if there was a super God, that means either the God or the super God would have something that the other did not have. And to have something that the other does not have means that you have a potency that is not actualized. That means you are lacking some good, and therefore you are not God. Okay? And that's basically those two things. That if you keep going super God, super duper God, super duper God, super duper 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 God, super God to the 10th power, to the 20th power, to the 100th power, okay, you're still trapped in infinite regress. You still haven't gotten yourself out of it. And secondly, if you claim that one God, there's two gods, then one has something the other does not, and the one that has something that, this is all hypothetically because we know there's not two gods, but just philosophically looking at it. One has something the other does not, And that being that has something that the other does not, I mean, the one that doesn't have that being is lacking in something. He has a potential to be more, and in God there is no potency. There is pure act. In him, everything that is and everything that possibly can be.
Okay, so the definition of God then is pure act with no potency?
Right. I am who am. It's really a Thomistic definition. I am who am. I am pure existence. There is nothing that God needs. There is nothing that God does not have. He is pure act with no potency. Now also we understand better why the principles of act and potency are so important. When you throw them away, your whole understanding of God changes, and you end up with the fluffy white man in the cloud who will just send you to heaven no matter what, and who is
made by super duper
and who is human, and who is, you know, and who you can find fault with. You're not allowed. I mean, we can't find fault with God, but if you have the wrong understanding of God, you'll find fault with him. So anyway, that is the principle of infinite regress. It is when we get to the section on the 5 ways to prove the existence of God, you'll see that really all 5 of them are just different ways of applying this principle of reason of infinite regress. That, and I'll read it again, in a series of causes actually and essentially subordinated, you cannot regress infinitively. You can't have that chain going up to heaven with nobody holding it up. You can't have that freight train with no engine pushing it or pulling it. And that's our class for today.
Okay.
In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son.